Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream, and thank you to the 3 people who have liked the video even before the live stream has started. That is some true love you all are showing for my channel and for my work here. Thank you very much for that. So today's discussion is going to be a fun one. Have you ever said good things about a person or considered someone a very good person or almost hero worshipped someone? And then they have said or done something that has left you absolutely flabbergasted, and you end up feeling like a fool, or you end up feeling like, oh, man, I was so stupid to support that person, or you feel like absolutely betrayed, you feel disappointed, you feel angry. Have you ever felt that? Well, I have defended Deepak at many points when a lot of people on the Kushal Mehra Abhijit and Mitra side have considered Deepak to be a casteist person and have started hating him or disliking him. And a lot of actually casteist people have started liking Deepak extra because they think Deepak is casteist like them. And I know no such people are actually there in our live streams anymore because I would claim this with full responsibility that our live streams are probably the only where anyone has discussed with of course you guys, with the audience, casteism in depth with the most amount of honesty and respect for all sorts of opinions, okay? And therefore, if anyone is really a casteist person, by which I mean someone who endorses bad behavior towards someone on the basis of their family lineage, those sorts of people are probably no longer my subscribers, or at least they are not on my regular viewing list. But there is that misconception about Deepak, okay? But I have defended him, and I have always had that sort of a, let's say, I have always felt that what if someday he proves me wrong? Well, I'm happy to say that day is not today. Today I feel like I have triumphed. This is my victory day. And today I'm going to celebrate my victory for the first 15 minutes of the live stream today, because we are going to discuss some things that I was absolutely right about Deepak when I said some things, okay? And then we are going to move on to discussing a paper. By those of you who don't know, we have discussed another paper by this person. His name is he used to be a professor, Declan Quigley. He used to be a researcher in the field of sociology, no, I think anthropology, in a university called University of St. Andrews in Edinburgh, which was the first university in Scotland, okay? It was founded in 410 AD, okay? No, it's probably 1410 AD. I'm getting mixed up now. But he was gradually bullied out of his job. He had to quit his job, or he was kind of fired even, and then he challenged it, etc. There's a long history behind that. You all can check out all those articles if you really want to find out about him. Because he was basically proving wrong all the dominant narratives on casteism in India, okay? Now he runs sort of a massage parlor in Spain, okay? But first we are going to discuss where Deepak exactly stands on the casteism issue. And for that we are going to look at just the video that came out yesterday on Ashish Dhar's channel, okay? It's called Upward. And I really wanted to discuss and react to the entire video, but I think it's already such an underrated channel. They have so many high quality educational videos on their channel, and their subscriber is just 1,48,000, okay? And every video has just like 20,000, 30,000 views. So he's basically not making any fucking money out of it. But whatever he's making, I don't want to take a bite out of that right now. So I want that video to give Ashish Dhar whatever money he earns first, and then maybe months later we will discuss that videos in its entirety someday. But today we will check out a very specific 5-10 minute portion from the video where Deepak proves me right on the things I had said just about 1 or 2 weeks back while discussing a paper by Nicholas Dirks, okay? Check this out. Let's see if there's comments important. I'm a Savarkar admirer, but Abhijit gang is putting Hindus too much into guilt trip. There are nuances to that side as well, I'll argue that. But let me first show you, let me do a bit of a self-promotion first, because I want you all to be very clear on my argument here. Because my argument mainly is that people are taking sides in this thing or people are seemingly on two different sides because their egos are coming into play a little bit, I would argue. Because on the main 3-4 questions on casteism, J. Deepak, Kushal Mehra, Abhijit Iyer Mitra don't have a disagreement. That is my argument, okay? So please just check my argument first, and then I'll show you how J. Deepak is absolutely what I was claiming he is, or his views are. And therefore, the people who are starting to dislike him because of his casteist views are wrong, and people who are trying to support him or and think he's a casteist hero for people who are in fact casteist, they are also wrong. They're stupid to think him to be their messiah, okay? Check this out. Oh mom, look, I'm on TV. Okay, let me put on the headphone. So the context is that someone, a very, very anti-caste person, was commenting that, will you dare to comment on the Kushal Mehra J. Deepak debate? Okay. So I said, what's there to dare on this? And then I went ahead and made my point, okay? Check this out. Really on any huge different poles altogether, okay? See, J. Deepak talks about what you're reading. I will dare to react to what? See, don't think that J. Deepak, Kushal Mehra, or Abhijit Iyer Mitra are really on any huge different poles altogether, okay? All these people are basically are lost in a war of semantics and rhetorics, okay? Kushal Mehra and Abhijit Iyer Mitra have their ego to protect here. J. Deepak has mistakenly considered all these conversations and discourses as an attack on specifically Brahmins or Hindus in general. The thing is, there are basically 2 or 3 factors that you can agree or disagree about. Did birth-based casteism exist? Does it exist today? Yes. All 3 of them agree, okay? Kushal Mehra, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, J. Deepak. Did bad things happen? Did atrocities happen because of these structures, these systems? I guarantee you, J. Deepak agrees, Kushal Mehra agrees, Abhijit Iyer Mitra agrees. Were these bad behaviors done only and only by Brahmins? I guarantee you, J. Deepak agrees. I guarantee you that all these 3 know that they were not done just by Brahmins. Kushal Mehra agrees with me, Abhijit Iyer Mitra agrees with me, J. Deepak agrees with me that they were never done just by Brahmins. Where is the difference in their opinion? What's the debate about? What's the argument about? The problem is with this bullshit, ambiguous, hollow word called casteism, casteist. What do you mean by casteism today? What do you mean when you say that this place has casteism? This place had some casteist incident, okay? There we need to get some clarity. Today, basically discriminating against anyone on the basis of caste is illegal, right? If anyone, and is it really J. Deepak's case or Abhijit Iyer Mitra's case or Kushal Mehra's case that these laws should go away, that people should be discriminated on the basis of caste? Again, I guarantee you that no. All 3 of them agree on this. Okay. So, where is the casteism then happening? That is, some people are behaving badly against some people on the streets. Nowhere else. In offices you can't do it. Okay? Unless you do it illegally. तो इलीगल काम तो हर जगह पे होता है, वो तो है ही. इलीगल काम रोकने के लिए तुमको कोई एंटायर जाति या एंटायर वर्ण या एंटायर देश या एंटायर रिलीजन को गाली नहीं देना पड़ता है. इलीगल काम हो रहा है, ढूंढो, जेल में भेजो बेंचो को. बट वेयर इज इन कास्टिज्म हैपनिंग? एंड डज योर criticism of casteism end up sounding like a criticism of just Brahmins? Okay, there these 3 people are just lost in a war of words and semantic, rhetoric and semantic, where I have no stake in. I know what these 3 agree on. I agree with these 3 people on exactly those same things. There is no basically disagreement here. So, for example, Sri Iyer's show where Abhijit Iyer Mitra walked out. That's a problem with semantics basically. That entire episode went to hell because of semantics. Because Abhijit Iyer Mitra, since his education, he comes from a sort of a social science, arts background kind of reading books, whereas people from the STEM backgrounds, people like Sri Iyer, who are just not getting the rhetoric of Abhijit Iyer Mitra, who are not understanding exactly how precise Abhijit Iyer Mitra is being, they are not getting them, and both of them are fighting against each other. What was Sri Iyer saying and what was Abhijit Iyer Mitra saying? Abhijit Iyer Mitra was saying, if you are a Brahmin who says that no bad things happened, then I have a problem with you. Sham Sharma is a Brahmin. Kushal Mehra, I guess, is a Brahmin. I don't know. Do you think when he is abusing Brahmins, he is abusing Sham Sharma? Is he abusing Kushal Mehra? He is saying, if you are a Brahmin who says these things didn't happen, then I have a problem with you. Sri Iyer के दिमाग में ये घुसा ही नहीं. CR को बोल रहा है, do you as a Brahmin say that these things didn't happen? He's saying, no, but Brahmins did so many good things. अरे ठीक है, did good things. Did your ancestors also do bad things? No, but we did good things. तो इंग्लिश ग्रामर अगर किसी को पता नहीं तो ये मेरा प्रॉब्लम भी नहीं है, जैसा दीपक का भी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, अभिजीत मित्र का भी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. Okay. And this brings another very important point to my mind, that a lot of concerns that you have from people who you think might be casteist people, but they are saying that no, we are not casteist, we are just following tradition, etc. In that case, go ahead and ask them point blank questions, okay, on Twitter or whatever. Just mail them if you're really that bothered about them. Ask them point blank. Give them a hypothetical scenario. Let's say in this situation, let's say set up a casteist situation and ask them, do you endorse this incident? And if they say that yes, it's great. Yes, it's great if a higher caste person pees in the mouth of a lower caste person. It's great. It's written in some dharma shastras I have read. Okay. If that is the case, then you get the guarantee that yes, in fact, that person is a fucking asshole and is a casteist. Okay. And I guarantee you, J. Deepak won't defend any such situation. Okay. Ask J. Deepak point blank that do you defend someone not being given water just in some village on some road just because he's from a lower caste? Ask him point blank. Is he going to defend it? Do you think he is? He is not. Therefore, they are not in any disagreement. Okay. Then what is the fault from Kushal Mehra, Abhijit and Mitra's side? They know that Brahmins were never the only people who did the bad things. But there is the issue that they are making the point in such a way that they are laying the most blame at the feet of Brahmins. So that's a weird thing to do, because I know that they know that every caste and jati and varna had bad people in their fold. Okay, I don't know what to do about that. But this is where J. Deepak stands. Okay, according to me at least. Now let me show you where J. Deepak confirms all my claims. Okay, let's go to Ashish Dhar's podcast now.
So,
and before I move on to this video, let me just tell you guys that there are 3 Indic-oriented, Hindutva-oriented channels or Hindu-oriented channels on YouTube, which are most underrated in terms of the quality of content they give versus the amount of subscribers they have. Okay, Upward, Kushal Mehra, and Nityanand Mishra's channel, man. What hilarious subscribe count! What 62,000 subscribers? What the fuck are you guys doing, man? Please go and watch these people's videos the most.
it is there nevertheless, which is you are reclaiming temples, but at the same time, the existing temples are not free.
Yeah. Actually, the question was very juicy. They got to it much later because J. Deepak digressed and brought the point to the topic we are discussing. Okay, interesting. And this is what I was also thinking, that is what might be, which I was basically saying that it's probably J. Deepak's ego can be blamed here. That J. Deepak knows how to defend himself. That no, here, I'm not a casteist. But he has stopped doing that sort of an apology anymore on Twitter because he's very pissed off with the other side. He's saying that no, if you think I'm casteist, fuck you. I won't even respond to you. That's his attitude now. But all my claims are proven here because he considers Ashish Dhar an honest actor in this conversation. Therefore, he clarifies that in fact, what I was claiming is in fact, he too believes in that. Okay, that is the issue here. But Ashish Dhar brings up a very interesting question here, but which was, we are not going to discuss that today, that what about those small temples, okay? Because the big temple, everyone wants to maintain it because there's so much money to be handled. What about the small temples? Especially when there are already so many small temples that need renovation right now.
Now coming to another aspect of this debate, which is not, I mean, the connection is not very apparent, but it is there nevertheless, which is you are reclaiming temples, but at the same time, the existing temples are not free. So what would reclamation even mean without autonomy of temples?
No, it's not possible. Destroy Jati, destroy every institution, then we'll talk about it.
Linguist, I know you would be considered a trad amongst all my viewers, but you are pretty. You are not that pissed off to find out that Jati Varna existed in Korea, Japan also, right? Which is why we are discussing papers like Nicholas B. Dirks and Declan Quigley as well, which is pointed out to by that person who was just here, S. Pal, okay, or S. Paul. What's his name here? I don't know. So he is that mysterious sociologist Hindutvadi sociologist who keeps sending us these papers. Okay, he is also trying to prove that Jati Varna like structures and systems existed everywhere. But now that's in fact pissing off a lot of trads who in fact probably want to do bad behavior or endorse bad behaviors towards lower castes, who are saying that no. The Jati Varna system is in fact so great that it existed only and only in India and nowhere else. That's a even more weirder position. That's basically more trad than your position even.
What are you saying? You're Jativadi? I'm so sorry, I disagree with you. I think there's a fundamental mistake in your question. I completely disagree with you. I think you live in the Stone Ages. I'm sorry. One of the principled objections that I have to temple reclamation is, once you reclaim, your caste system will be back in the temple. What will you do then? I'm sorry, I have no interest in answering this question at all. Over to you.
I think one way to do that would be mass scale conversions would once and for all remove all the fear of reverting to that sort of system which they are.
No, but they'll also say that, do you understand the problem with asking people to do ghar wapsi? They don't know what will be the status once they come back to the Hindu fold. You see, Russians never had this problem when they decided to convert to the Hindu fold under ISKCON. Nobody had this problem. All the people who are visiting ashrams in Bangalore, who decided to actually come back to Hinduism in one way or the other, nobody had this problem. Some people will have a problem only because apparently Varna barrier is standing in the way. The Arya Samaji movement did not apparently give a response to this or an answer to this.
Guys, now here is where J. Deepak is actually going to piss off a lot of trads here. Because see the lane he's taking. He's saying that if at all casteism, caste-based bad behavior is a problem, then you are already free to join movements like Arya Samaj, ISKCON, because those people who non-Indians who joined those folds, they never had this problem in their mind. They never had this query in their mind that what will be my Varna once I join. So, J. Deepak is giving a stamp that yes, even if you join those folds and you don't follow Jati Varna ashram in any way, even then you are as Hindu as me. Okay, you are in the Hindu fold. You are just not that orthodox. ये तो बहुत सारे trads को भी गुस्सा दिला देगा. So you see, J. Deepak is not that trad casteist hero that people think.
All the Gayatri Parivar movements and other movements, which have significantly taken a different position from traditional orthodox position of Hindu Dharma, apparently don't provide a response to all of this. See, if your fundamental goal is to somehow attack the traditional orthodoxy in one way or the other, you will present it as a bogey for all sorts of issues and you'll invent problems where none exist. Okay? The fact of the matter is, whether traditional orthodoxy likes it or not or wants it or not, there have been multiple movements that have come out of the Hindu fold or within the Hindu fold at least for over 150 years, at the very least for 150 years, where they have provided certain alternatives. And those alternatives have made it possible for people from different parts of the world to embrace Hinduism. Surely, Julian...
And J. Deepak is endorsing that. He's saying it's fine. It's completely acceptable. What's the problem with that?
And those alternatives have made it possible for people from different parts of the world to embrace Hinduism. Surely Julia Roberts did not ask this question, what will I be once I become a Hindu? Right? Richard Gere did not ask these questions. I think it's a bogey. According to me, temple reclamation as a whole, as an umbrella, represents reclamation of occupied sites and freedom from state control. I'm not saying freedom from state supervision. There's a difference between state control and state supervision. People have to just read this one judgment, Subramania Swamy versus Union of India, which was delivered in the context of the Chidambaram temple, the Sabhanagar temple, where the court has struck this fantastic distinction, which is to say, the state can retain the right of audit. The state can retain the right of supervision. And the state can take over for a momentary period, for a brief period where it sees mismanagement. But its first job is to give it back to the community as and when possible, while retaining the power of supervision.
So guys, J. Deepak is giving Raita vibes today, okay, right? Isn't it?
Where it sees mismanagement. But its first job is to give it back to the community as and when possible, while retaining the power of supervision. So the inability of people to understand that state supervision and state control are two very different things is the central issue here. And if we specifically take the position that, dekho bhai, the state has every right to ensure that there is no caste-based discrimination in terms of entry and access.
Ab bolo. Ab kya hoga? The government has every right to make sure all castes are allowed to enter. ये जैसा दीपक ने बोल दिया है ऑन रिकॉर्ड ऑन कैमरा. अब क्या बोलोगे? अब क्या जैसा दीपक अब रायता हो गया क्या? Now he makes one caveat, which is that as long as, let's listen to this.
As long as the traditions of the temple and access to Garbhagriha are respected.
Okay. I have no problem with the Garbhagriha issue because first of all it is the tradition, and of course not just because of the tradition, because it's not even directly caste based bad behavior के कैटेगरी में ही आता भी नहीं है. because ऐसा नहीं है कि रास्ते से कोई भी रैंडम ब्राह्मण जाके घुस जाएगा गर्भगृह में, ठीक है? ऐसा नहीं है. Very specific people are allowed in the Garbhagriha. Secondly, I don't have a problem with people who are worshipping their based on their family, having it as their family profession, etc. Because one of the main arguments against casteism from commies se leke Hindutva, the anti-casteist people, has always been that you are not even a real Brahmin. You are not doing any of the things that a Brahmin is supposed to do. You are not living like how a Brahmin is supposed to live. Read the Manusmriti. अगर तुम ब्राह्मण हो, अगर मनुस्मृति पढ़ते हो, तुमको अभी लगेगा भाई मैं ही चेंज कर रहा हूँ अपना वरना, मुझे नहीं जीना है ये जिंदगी. तो कौन ब्राह्मण है भाई? हिंदू अवेकनिंग के लिए कुशल मेहरा ने ज़्यादा किया या ममता बनर्जी ने ज़्यादा किया है, बुद्धदेव भट्टाचार्य ने ज़्यादा की? इन लोगों को हम ब्राह्मण मान ले क्या? मगर अगर कोई फैमिली का वो पौरोहित्य का प्रोफेशन मेंटेन कर रहा है, सब जो टेक्स्ट पढ़ना है, जो ज्ञान उसको अर्जन करना है, वो सब कर रहा है, वो एक्चुअली ब्राह्मण का जिंदगी बिता रहा है, उसको मैं क्या बोलूँ? उसको भी मैं ब्राह्मण ना मानूँ? अजीब बात है. द ओनली प्रॉब्लम दैट माइट come out of this argument of J. Deepak is that as long as the traditions are maintained, I have the state should in fact take over and look into whether everyone is being allowed to enter and that no one is being prevented on the basis of their caste, etc. Okay. Now the caveat here will be that when they were in fact not being allowed to enter, was that temple created in a place where these people were considered low caste, who were not worshippers of that place anyway, and therefore they were not the first movers, and therefore they were never allowed to enter the temple anyway. Okay, maybe they gradually gotten into the Vedic fold and therefore but remained being considered a lower caste person, but therefore even if they agreed to the Vedic culture or agreed to get into the Vedic culture, they never got entry into the temple. Or was it the case that one fine morning some पुरोहित decided भाई आज रात 12 बजे से कोई लोअर कास्ट पर्सन नहीं घुसेगा इस मंदिर में, और सबने अचानक मान लिया अगले सुबह से? ऐसा अगर है तो वो कैसे हुआ था? वो भी ट्रेडिशन के बेसिस पे ही हुआ था ना, या फिर कोई मतलब शास्त्र के बेसिस पे ही तो हुआ था? तो शास्त्र लाके अगर कोई ये फिर से जस्टिफाई करना शुरू करे तो उसको हमको हैंडल करना पड़ेगा. As far as J. Deepak is concerned, his views are clear here. That's all I'm saying.
Will prevail everywhere. Okay? And the state will have the right to undertake random audits to see koi घपला हो रहा है, क्या हो रहा है.
देखो.
All these rights are actually preserved. The petitions which relate to the challenge to the HRC legislations are out in public domain. Nobody will be able to point out a single challenge where it says the state shall not have the right to prevent discrimination. Those aspects have been completely untouched in the legislations. So it's not as if these legislations have been challenged lock, stock and barrel. The Orwell...
So he's pointing out that these legislations have not even been challenged. कोई जाके बोल नहीं रहा है कि नहीं एक ऐसा legislation डालो कि इससे और शूद्र कोई मंदिर में ना घुस पाए.
Provisions where the state has exclusive and exceptional powers to inveigle itself into the institution at the expense of the community's autonomy are the provisions which have been challenged. Because the traditional understanding for us, if you were to truly follow what the Constitution wants under 25(2)(b) is, the community shall control this with the clear caveat that the formerly depressed classes who were denied entry to temples shall not be denied access anymore. Okay? At the same time, the religious denominational aspect of the temple shall be preserved. The hereditary rights of Archakas shall be preserved.
Yes.
Okay. And you will have a trust-based composition where the community chips in to manage the secular affairs of the temple without altering or changing the religious aspect of the temple. That is the simple funda here. कहाँ है solution? कहाँ है solution? Alternative legislation कहाँ है? भाई problem में ही solution है because there are other templates. You should just go through the 1920 template of the Hindu charitable legislation that the British has introduced. That was a much better template than the 1959 version that is still in operation under the TNHRC. So take a look at the predecessor versions. Take a look at how the Gurudwara Act has been functioning. Take a look at what you're willing to extend even to the Waqf for that matter. I can understand when if there is absolutely no legislative example outside of this and there is a vacuum outside of this. भाई आपके पास इतने सारे compare and contrast exercises and tools हैं. So look at the excuses being created. Where is the alternative? What will happen if the state gets out? The Varnashrama Dharma system effectively stands in the way of conversion.
You see now J. Deepak's problem with his Twitter debates. exact these things, same things were asked to him. He did not feel the need to respond to them because he thinks, चलो तुमको फालतू में accuse करना है तो मैं उत्तर दूंगा भी नहीं. That's the issue here. That's why Twitter debates are a low IQ debate to begin with, and therefore let's listen to these things.
All bogies, absolute bogies. Tell me who is actually following Varnashrama Dharma in their life these days. Is anybody following the Nitya Karma according to the prescription? The answer is a no.
0.1% of the population.
So who is actually holding a chabuk and saying, Karo, varna tum Hindu nahi rahoge? It's left to you ultimately. It's left to your own devices. As simple as that. The ones who are wedded to a particular institution and the traditions associated with the institution are the ones who continue to follow it. Everybody else says, it's my life. As simple as that.
No, and
So, again, that famous claim also gets reinforced here that no one is living their life according to their Varna anyway. If you even want to do the things in your life that, like me reading Rig Veda, not being Brahmin, okay? Although I'm from the third Varna, so I'm allowed technically anyway. But even if I read them and discuss them on my live stream, who is going to come and stop me? Okay, unless it's some absolute stupid criminal, okay? तो वैसे भी तो क्रिमिनल को हैंडल करने का तो बहुत सारा लिस्ट बाकी है ही, तो अगर उसमें भी एक ऐसा कोई पागला चौदह आ जाएगा, मगर ये तो ऐसा नहीं है कि पूरा का पूरा 4.3% इंडिया का ब्राह्मण कम्युनिटी आ जाएगा मुझे आप ये सर्तन से जुदा करने को. तो प्रॉब्लम किस प्रॉब्लम का हम बात कर रहे हैं यहाँ पे? तो बाकी क्या रहेगा प्रॉब्लम? रास्ते में बवाल करना, किसी को गाली दे देना, ये सब. चैट पिटिशन टू हेल्प हिम क्विट स्मोकिंग. क्या मुझे? अच्छा, Anand Sridhar is saying, sorry, almost no one is studying why outcasting happens and why were some other communities made outcast. This relates to anthropology. Look at the outcasting of the Yazuka community. The outcasting of actual not elite military personnel in Chinese traditional society. Again, is consequence of the anthropology of that society. Yeah. And is that outcasting happening one fine morning? That does happen because of some bad thing done by one person from their group or the leader of their group, etc. But also, some people were never in the caste system to begin with, like Panchamas. The people who did not want to subscribe to the Nagara or Grama way of life. People who never wanted to come out and live in, come out of the forest, okay. Because ऐसा तो नहीं था कि तब मतलब नगर, ग्रामा और फॉरेस्ट में ऐसा बहुत कुछ ज़्यादा डिफरेंस है, ऐसा तो नहीं है, ठीक है. अगर तुम ग्राम में रह रहे हो, ठीक है, या फिर तुम नगर में रह रहे हो और तुम राजा महाराजा नहीं हो, तब तुम्हारा घर क्या है? मिट्टी का घर है, फैन वगैरह ऐसी नहीं है, मच्छर काट रहा है, पूजा कर रहे हो, यज्ञ कर रहे हो. यही सबका ही जिंदगी है. तुम जंगल में रहो, ग्राम में रहो, नगर में रहो. तो अब तो डिफरेंस ज़्यादा है, इसलिए लगता है अरे ब्राह्मणों ने उनको इवल करके टेस्ला चलाना नहीं दिया नगर में रखे और जंगल में रख दिए भोसरी के. अरे तब तो डिफरेंस ही उतना नहीं था. Okay, let's see. You cannot recite but can read as per trad if you are Shudra, imaginary condition. Yes, but I'm saying that, as Deepak is saying, I am going to read it. I'm going to discuss it. I'm not going to pronounce the shlokas anyway because, first of all, if it's written in one because Sanskrit sentence words are this big, right? I think in that case, the ISKCON books are the best in terms of how they write the words. Okay, they are broken up into 4 or 5 pieces. But by my Bengali Rig Veda has this big sentences. So if I start reading it, it will take me 10 minutes to finish the word. So I'm not going to read that anyway because it's going to be a bullshit live stream. Okay, because it's going to be an absolutely horrid disrespect of the way of reading that Sanskrit word. That's why I'm not going to read it. But if I did, who was going to stop me? Okay, now let's start our paper. So, the paper is about this Professor Declan Quigley, who was kicked out of his university in St. Andrews for saying something that will piss off both commies and in fact a lot of trads, which is that Brahmins were not the authority figure to begin with. Okay, they did not have the authority to go around telling kings that अच्छा भाई आज से ये वो वर्ण है, उसके साथ खराब व्यवहार करो, इसको ऊपर जाति दे दो. ऐसा बोलने का authority king का था. किंग के नीचे ब्राह्मण थे. Even though not theoretically, in practice, Brahmins never had the topmost decision-making position. That is what his research proves, and we've discussed one paper already. This is another paper. This is a short 18-page paper, okay? Let's see what he writes. Well, let's see what he finds out. Scapegoats. The killing of kings and ordinary people. Declan Quigley, University of St. Andrews. This article uses the example of royal ritual to examine the idea that underlying structures can be abstracted from particular cultural settings. It is argued that African material on kingship and scapegoats can be used to elucidate South Asian material on pollution beliefs and caste. क्योंकि scapegoats तो हर सोसाइटी में होता है, ठीक है, कि अच्छा हमारा कुछ पाप वगैरह कुछ हो गया है, इसके वजह से अब किसी का सैक्रिफाइस करना है तो इसको मार दो या फिर उसके साथ इसको कुछ पनिशमेंट दो ताकि हमारा सबका पाप धुल जाए, ठीक है. वो कॉन्टेक्स्ट के बेसिस पे हम कास्ट को देख सकते हैं कि नहीं, और तब जाके हमारा स्केपगोट कौन बनता है, वो इनका रिसर्च है. Scapegoating is clearly alive and well in certain quarters at the end of the 20th century and in the United Kingdom in the staple of the so-called tabloid press. Royalty is one of the favorite targets, though there has perhaps been some diminution in the severity of the attacks following the death of Princess Diana in 1997. This choice of royal figures is not accidental. So he is already hinting that the royal family of England is kind of the scapegoat. This choice of royal figures is not accidental, and it was hardly serendipity that the Prime Minister at the time of Diana's death secured significant political advantage with one brilliant three-word epitaph: the People's Princess. It was, of course, the people who had turned her into the most hunted person of the modern age in the first place. Okay, People's Princess. People's Princess का मौत हो ही गया क्योंकि people के डिमांड से पेपराजी उनको चेस करते फिरते थे और उनके बारे में अनाप शनाप लिखते थे, etc. As her brother so poignantly put it during his funeral oration. But it is unlikely that they could have done so if she had not occupied the position she did in relation to two future kings. Okay, because she was the mother of two future kings. In this sense, the scapegoating of royal figures requires an ideological contradiction, which is the victim is a symbol of perfection. The victim is a symbol of perfection. This article is concerned with aspects of monarchical organization and ritual that relate to scapegoating and related devices. While the mechanisms I will refer to are mainly symbolic, I do not wish to trivialize those cases of scapegoating which lead to the death of the victims. On the contrary, so like if at all a lower caste person gets killed for being lower caste, we are not talking about that here. On the contrary, what I wish to emphasize is that even in those cases where scapegoats are actually killed, they must be killed symbolically to be made to appear as non-human in some sense, like Naravali, etc. Although I've heard that Naravali in fact did not happen with any random person, they were captives in war, etc. Right? References to Sir James George Fraser and his magnum opus, The Golden Bough, are apt to be dismissive and to concentrate on a stock list of themes. In particular, his undisciplined comparativism and the indefensible idea that humanity evolved through magic and religion to science. Even in the abridged editions, Fraser's work remains extremely frustrating, almost unreadable, as he jumps from one society to another in one paragraph after another, matching superficial resemblances of cultural traits to one another. It is not difficult to see why Malinowski, though inspired by Fraser's endeavor, should have been moved to advocate the understanding of institutions in their context. Nevertheless, without having to revert to some pre-Malinowskian endorsement of Fraser's method, there is something compelling in the sheer number of instances he adduces of certain phenomena, and he was surely correct that in certain cases this can hardly be accidental. देखते हैं क्यों accidental नहीं था. Fraser's central ideas in The Golden Bough are perhaps better known to anthropologists indirectly via Evans Pritchard's famous 1948 Fraser lecture entitled The Divine Kingship of the Shilluk of the Nilotic Sudan, emphasizing as very serious anthropological commentator has done, as every serious anthropological commentator has done, that kingship is normally a ritual office. Okay, listen to this. Kingship is normally a ritual office rather than a government office, because है तो वो राजा, उसका तो divine ordained duty है, हाँ ये तो राज धर्म है. Kingship is normally a ritual office rather than a governmental office. Evans Pritchard states that the Shilluk king reigns but does not govern, and that in any case it is Nikang, and the first king of the Shilluk and the creator of the nation who is the true king, rather than the actual individual who holds the office. Okay, it is kingship, not the king, which is divine. Okay, the office of the king. Okay, So you can't consider directly compare it with a prime minister or president in this modern setting. Sacred is the more appropriate word for general purposes, not divine exactly. The idea is expressed in the saying heard in a number of societies whenever one king has died and another king is about to take over, that the king is dead, long live the king. How can those sentences be true or said just after one another? The king is dead, long live the king. The intent of which would be rendered more accurately by saying that the king is dead, long live the kingship. Okay, ये पर्टिकुलर राजा मर गए हैं मगर इनका वंश चलता रहे, ये ऑफिस ऑफ द किंग चलता रहे. That is the idea that people are intending when they say that. According to Evans Pritchard, because of the mystical values associated with the kingship and centered in the person of the king, in the king as a person, he must keep himself in a state of ritual purity by performing certain actions and observing certain prescriptions, and in a state of physical perfection. Our authorities say that the Shilluk in the Sudan believed that should the king become physically weak, the whole people might suffer, and further that if a king becomes sick or senile, he should be killed to avoid some grave national misfortune, such as defeat in war, epidemic or famine. The king must be killed to save kingship, and with it the whole Shilluk, save the whole Shilluk people. While conceding the strength of these ideas for indicating what he calls the mystical nature of the kingship, Evans Pritchard concludes that Shilluk kings were not actually killed. This was, he says, probably a fiction sustained by nothing other than traditional evidence, an expression which he seems to be using as a synonym for myth. He searches his conclusion in spite of the categorical statement of the Seligmans, which he reports, quote, "There is not the least doubt that killings of the Shilluk were killed with due ceremony when they began to show signs of old age or ill health." Okay, राजा बुढ़ा हो जाता था वैसे भी जाके मार देते थे with a lot of ceremony and traditional and theological justifications. Nevertheless, in spite of Evans Pritchard's denial of the Seligman's Seligman meaning उनका पौरोहित type का office status, Seligman's version and his own diluted version of Fraser's theory, he too finishes with a strong thesis whereby regicide, meaning Raja ko marna, regicide is seen as a device for asserting the kingship, which represents the whole society against the individual king who inevitably comes from and is more strongly identified with a particular segment of the society. तो हमारा तो मारने का ज़रूरत भी नहीं पड़ता है क्योंकि वैसे भी बोल दिया गया है तुमको तो भाई वानप्रस्थ में जाना था, या फिर एंड में जाके जैन बन जाओ, या फिर सब संसार छोड़ दो, etc. While it is well known that Fraser believed the scapegoat king to be a widely recurring institution, it is less well appreciated that the Golden Bough contains two explanations of the scapegoat king, not one. The explanation most widely cited is that referred to by Evans Pritchard, which is where the king is held responsible for the well-being of the kingdom. Okay, where the king is held responsible for the well-being of the kingdom, and this is thought to be made manifest in his own bodily death. Okay. And this is thought to be made manifest in his own bodily death, or in his own bodily health. The other thesis is that the king is held to embody the sins, evil, death, inauspiciousness of the people. He is a kind of dangerous, polluted vessel who must find some means of ridding himself of the contagion he absorbs in case he imperils both himself and the kingdom. Okay, क्योंकि राजा को बहुत सारे एक्चुअली खराब काम करने पड़ रहे हैं जो कि आइडियली नहीं करना था, क्योंकि मतलब मारना, टॉर्चर करना, ये सब तो मतलब आइडियल नहीं है कभी भी, मगर करना तो पड़ रहा है, एटलीस्ट हाथों में खून भी लगाना पड़ रहा है. ओके, तो उसके बाद उनका स्पिरिचुअल क्लेंजिंग कैसे होगा? हियर कम्स द रोल ऑफ द ब्राह्मण. This latter idea is interesting for two reasons. First, or also the example of the Rameshwaram temple in Tamil Nadu, I guess, right? So, which was not the current structure, but the temple itself was first built, constructed, and consecrated by Prabhu Sri Ram himself. Why? Because he was trying to look for forgiveness for doing a Brahman Hatya, which is one of the two biggest sort of blasphemies in Hinduism that you can do. Brahman Hatya and Go Hatya. He was killing a devoutest of devout Shiv Bhakt Brahmin, grandson of a very very qualified rishi. उसको मारना पड़ा. उसके वजह से Shri Ram was concerned obviously that अच्छा, I don't want any guilt or मतलब पाप etc. So I need some spiritual cleansing. So I need blessings and forgiveness from Lord Shiva. So I'm building this temple for him. And who is going to help me do that? Who's the mediator? The Brahmin. First, because it is quite independent of the belief in the consequences of the physical degeneration of the king, and in fact makes this belief redundant. According to Fraser's second scapegoat concept, kings simply are repositories of inauspiciousness, death, and so forth, whatever their health. Physical degeneration may be dangerous for the kingdom, but kingship, the office of the king, kingship itself seems to be inherently dangerous, even if the king is in perfect health. If the Shilluk case is typical, all the rituals which surround kingship, all the rituals which surround kingship, and they are many, prolonged and elaborate rituals, they are designed to keep it in a state of perfection. That kingship has to remain in a state of perfection by ridding the incumbent king of the danger he accumulates by virtue of his position. In other words, the rituals seem to be saying that the only good king is a pure king, obviously. A dead king, an ancestor, could be made to fit this bill particularly well, as Hocart, that other great theorist of kingship, recognized when he wrote that, quote, the first kings must have been dead kings, because he is being considered perfect. But with a living king, such purity can only be attained for an instant through to particular rituals, paradigmatically sacrifice, okay. जो व्यक्ति मर गया है उसके बारे में हम बहुत सारी अच्छी चीज़ें बोल सकते हैं, हम कुछ भी बोल सकते हैं, ये इस चीज़ में परफेक्ट थे, मतलब कभी भी कोई गलती नहीं करते थे, मगर सामने जो राजा जिंदा है उसका हम गलती देख रहे हैं सामने, कल ही एक गलती कर दिया, परसों एक गलती कर दिया था, हमको याद है अभी भी, एज अ सिटीजन ऑफ दैट किंग, ओके. तो उसका प्योरिटी कहाँ से आएगा? Once the ritual is finished, उसके लिए ritual लगेगा. Once the ritual is finished, the king automatically reverts to his normal everyday dangerous state of absorbing inauspiciousness, and the ritual procedures of purification must be reactivated. At the heart of kingship then, there is a paradox. The king must be pure, yet he cannot be so for more than an instant. क्योंकि हर वक्त ऐसा कुछ काम करना पड़ रहा है जिससे कि उनका प्योरिटी जा रहा है गड्ढे में. It is for this reason that the rituals surrounding monarchy are never ending. Fraser's second explanation of the scapegoat king is also interesting because it fits very nicely with what is, I believe, the only explanation of caste organization and ideology which makes sense of all the evidence. First, however, let me give some of Fraser's own Indian examples of the scapegoat in the sense of a repository of inauspiciousness. Okay? Indian context में ये जो claim कर रहे हैं कि जो कि scapegoat था, वो कितना एक स्टॉक, पूरा एक मतलब कंटेनर ऑफ इनऑस्पिशियसनेस थे. अब उनका एग्जांपल देखेंगे उस चीज़ का. The catch-all term I will use for evil, sin, death, etc. Inauspiciousness. So inauspiciousness का अच्छा translation होगा अशुभ, right? So we are talking about shubh and ashubh here. This phenomenon has acquired the derogatory label of contagious magic, a label which is quite misleading since the processes described highlight a very real concern of all societies exhibiting any degree of social differentiation. Okay. So it's not just contagious magic. This is misleading because that so-called contagious magic in fact ends up highlighting a very real concern of all societies exhibiting any degree of social differentiation. क्योंकि अरे भाई राजा है, राजा inauspicious बन गया तो हमारा क्या होगा? या फिर तो राजा तो मतलब कोई खराब रास्ते में जा रहा है, खराब राजा बन गया तब हम क्या करेंगे? Example 1, which is of the general principle of contagion, not particularly royal. This sort of thing goes on daily in Upper India, meaning probably North India. Often while walking of a morning in a bazaar, you will see a little pile of earth adorned with flowers in the middle of the road. Such a pile usually contains some scabs or scales from the body of a smallpox patient, this paper was written, I guess, in the 80s or 90s, I don't remember, which are placed there in the hope that, smallpox patient, okay, which are placed there in the hope that someone may touch them and by catching the disease may relieve the sufferer. Okay. This phenomenon is indeed very widely attested in North India and Nepal, and I have witnessed it myself, that if someone by chance, by mistake touches it, they will it's believed by Andhvishwas and Kusamskara that will take away the disease that the actual person is suffering from, okay? And that was also common everywhere. In Nordic, in Viking cultures, they believe that there were esoteric practices that let's say if you really lost a child right now, go and kill some other child or you bring this child back with some ritual in some way try to bring them back, but because of that someone else will die, etc. Those sorts of things were there. So again, that idea of taking someone's inauspiciousness on you, or like suffering for someone else's inauspiciousness. Okay, this phenomenon is indeed very widely attested in North India and Nepal, and I have witnessed it myself. It is very common, for example, when someone dies, that some of their belongings are placed at a crossroads, so that their sins, quote unquote, may be taken away by whomsoever passes by. Often this is not left to chance. Members of a particular caste are called upon to perform this duty and are deemed for this reason to be untouchables. क्योंकि इन लोगों को बोला जा रहा है तुम भाई हमारा खराब जो कर्म है या फिर अनहेल्दी कुछ डिजीज़ है वो तुम ले लो अब. Again, not particularly royal for this particular example. In South India, there is a painful Telugu remedy for a fever. It is to embrace a bald-headed Brahmin widow at the earliest streak of dawn. By doing so, you get rid of the fever. And no doubt, though this is not expressly affirmed, you at the same time transfer it to the bald-headed widow. When a Sinhalese is dangerously ill, and the physicians can do nothing, a devil dancer is called in, who by making offerings to the devils and dancing in the masks appropriate to the... You know what they're talking about, right? And dancing in the masks appropriate to them, conjures these demons of disease one after the other out of the sick man's body and into his own. He is now taking the disease onto him. So we are not talking about rationality or science here, okay? That क्या society था, कितना अजीब चीज़ें में विश्वास करता था. We are talking about a very specific thing, that what were the understandings behind this the Varna system, or what was exactly the status of Brahmins in this context. Okay, that we are discussing here. Therefore, we are not going to spend our time making fun of these beliefs. When a Sinhalese is dangerously ill and the physicians can do nothing, a devil dancer is called in, who by making offerings to the devils and dancing in the masks appropriate to them, conjures these demons of disease one after the other out of the sick man's body and into his own. Having thus successfully extracted the cause of the malady, the artful dancer lies down on a bier and, shamming death, is carried to an open place outside the village. Here, being left to himself, he soon comes to life again and hastens back to claim his reward. This is written in 1994. Okay, so you see the recurring theme that he's trying to point out is that there is someone in every Varna so far, or in every community, who is sort of there to take away or absorb the ashubhness of someone or the other. Example 4. Now, let's get to the royal portion. In Travancore, when a Raja is near his end, they seek out a holy Brahmin who consents to take upon himself the sins of the dying man in consideration of the sum of 10,000 rupees. Thus prepared to immolate himself on the altar of duty as a vicarious sacrifice for sin, the saint is introduced into the chamber of death and closely embraces the dying Raja, saying to him, "O king, I undertake to bear all your sins and diseases. May your highness live long and reign happily." Okay, having thus with a noble devotion taken to himself the sins of the sufferer and likewise the rupees, he is sent away from the country and never more allowed to return. Okay, अब कौमी आके बोल सकता है कि अरे इसका तो बढ़िया मज़ा था, राजा को ऐसे ही हक कर दिया, पैसे भी मिल गए और बोल दिया कि देखो अब तुम्हारा सिन सब मैंने ले लिया है, अब मैं चला कहीं और जाने. मगर ऐसा तो नहीं हो सकता. ये सब के सब ब्राह्मण्स पूरे के पूरे फ्रॉड एथीस्ट थे. ये ब्राह्मण एक्चुअली बिलीव करते थे कि वो राजा का सिन खुद पे ले रहा है. वो विश्वास करके भी ये करते थे. ये स्टेटस था एटलीस्ट इन दिस सिचुएशन ऑफ द ब्राह्मण्स. ओके, दे वर द absorbers of the inauspiciousness of the king. We are getting to know that from a live example, from a direct evidence here. Compare this with the following account of the funeral ceremony of the grandfather of the present king of Nepal. After the cremation of King Tribhuvana in 1955, the Mahabrahman, a funeral priest, lived in the, so I guess we would call that Rajpurohit in India. Funeral priest is different. Lived in the palace funeral priest lived in the palace for 13 days, sleeping in the king's bed, smoking the king's cigarettes, waited upon and taking what he wished of the king's possessions. The royal kitchens prepared what he desired, but the food was deliberately contaminated by a paste made from the bone of the king's forehead. Contaminated by a paste made from the bone of the king's head for the Brahman, Mahabrahman. At the end of this period, he received rupees 10,000 in alms, okay, bhiksha, and gifts from a worth a further rupees 200,000, including 2 elephants and a richly caparisoned horse. Mounted on one of the elephants, he left for exile in India. The people of Kathmandu and Thankot lined the road to stone him and to jeer. ये महाब्राह्मण को पत्थर मारा जाएगा, गाली दिया जाएगा. देखो भाई ब्राह्मण का क्या स्टेटस बना के रखा था. मनुस्मृति पढ़ेगा तो कोई ब्राह्मण नहीं बनेगा भाई. Kathmandu Daily, Rising Nepal, records that on the 11th day after the death of King Mahendra, the present king's father in 1972, the funeral priest, having eaten some ground up bone mixed to food in which the late king was particularly partial, was mounted on a तो जो बोल मिक्स इन फूड टू विच दिया तो जो स्पेसिफिक जो प्रिपरेशन राजा को अच्छा लगता था उस वही खाना उसमें राजा का हड्डी मिला के ब्राह्मण को खिला दिया जाएगा. Was mounted on a decorated elephant and escorted out of the city. The idea being to drive him away क्योंकि सारा का सारा राजा का inauspiciousness उस पे घुस गया है. ठीक है. In keeping with the spirit of the times, he was however allowed to return after 3 days. Fraser's own commentary on this phenomenon, अगर उसके पहले उसको पत्थर मारा जाएगा गाली दिया जाएगा. Fraser's own commentary on this phenomenon, for which he also gives many non-Indian examples, is as follows. Firstly, he notes that the expulsion of the evil tends to become periodic. He continues, on the one hand, we have seen that it has been customary to kill the human or animal god in order to save his divine life from being weakened by the inroads of age. On the other hand, we have seen that it has been customary to have a general expulsion of evils and sins once a year. Now, if it occurred to people to combine those two customs, the result would be the employment of the dying god as a scapegoat. He was killed not originally to take away sin, but to save the divine life. Listen to this. He was killed not originally to take away sin, but to save the divine life from the degeneracy of old age. But since he had to be killed at any rate, मारना तो वैसे भी था, people may have thought that they may as well seize the opportunity to lay upon him the burden of their sufferings and sins, in order that he might bear it away with him to the unknown world beyond the grave. This explanation is too dependent on accident and on collective intellect to have too much plausibility. It also distorts the evidence. Scapegoats need not be divine figures, as we saw from Fraser's own crossroads example. क्योंकि कहीं पे untouchables भी ये scapegoat है, ठीक है. और क्या example दिया? हाँ, कहीं पे bald headed widow scapegoat है, कहीं पे untouchable scapegoat है, कहीं पे ब्राह्मण भी scapegoat है. Scapegoat तो किसी ना किसी को बनाना चल ही रहा है. That is the observation here. मैं बहुत मोटा हो रहा हूँ. Fraser's own crossroads example. I will suggest that Fraser might have done better to use these examples to highlight his second explanation of the scapegoat phenomenon, the need to expel evil, okay? बाहर निकालना है. Expel evil and inauspiciousness, ashubhness. Kingship and inauspiciousness, okay? Dehosh draws on a wide range of mostly Central and West African examples to illustrate the intensely problematic nature of kingship. Referring to the post-installation period of the master of the earth among a voltaic group called the Samo, he says, the state of his body is now profoundly changed, because now that he has become master of the earth. He may only move about very slowly. He cannot touch the earth or walk barefoot or dance, etc. He has effectively become the scapegoat of the group. He is the quote-unquote pile of filth, the one who picks up and takes everything upon himself. He is held responsible for all the evil happenings in the village, the principal cause of which is the badness of its head. This theme is continued in two pre-publication passages, okay? This theme is continued in 2 pre-publication passages which were edited out of the final draft of my translation of this article. Here, Dehosh refers to a claim by Izzard that among the Mande and the Gur, the theme of filth, ordure, is fundamental in the symbolism of all the chiefdoms. The chief is the man on whom one pours everything one wants to get rid of, whether symbolically or in reality, literally. Similarly, Dehosh reports that in a film by Jean Rauch, immediately following the installation of a king in Ouagadougou, the first dignitary of the king addresses the new sovereign publicly saying, "You are a pile of filth." Where Dehosh considers that what these African kings have in common, he stresses 2 themes. First is that whatever the extent of his power, more often than not, his freedom of movement is carefully controlled. The sacred king is always, in one way or another, the prisoner of the group which invests him with power, and his regime is one of curtailed liberty. Indeed, this is sometimes taken to its conceivable limit when, during the rites of enthronement, a form of symbolic death takes place. That is to say, the king is symbolically killed at the very moment he is installed, making him into a living dead man. The underlying preoccupation here is the necessity of avoiding the natural death of the monarch by imposing on him a cultural end. Like in a way, I guess, retirement into a forest life. A less dramatic form of cultural control is found in various restrictions on the movements, dress, and speech of kings. It would seem that the idea is not just that the king's behavior should be seen to be distinctive. There appears to be a frequent desire to separate him from the earth, quite literally, this separation being somehow associated with death. The king of the Mamprusi in Ghana, for example, while called the owner of the world, is confined to his place and forbidden from touching the earth. The skins of animals sacrificed at his enthronement must always be placed between the earth and his feet. Other restrictions one sees in other monarchies, including being confined to the palace at night, being obliged to be carried everywhere, having the space around the royal personage as free as possible from contamination, being dressed in special clothes, being housed in special kinds of residences, and being prevented from talking or being addressed in the same manner as ordinary people. You see, all this applies to any president or prime minister, right? Does Narendra Modi have the same freedoms as you and I have in our daily life? He has other powers, but not the daily day-to-day daily life के schedule में जो freedoms है वो इनका नहीं है. All of these features are, of course, still prominent in the way in which contemporary Western royals are treated, even modern-day government heads. Although there is a tendency to see them as privileges rather than as restrictions. ठीक है, in some context it is a privilege, in some context it is a restriction. नरेंद्र मोदी आज जाके यूट्यूब में किसी को नहीं बोलता है क्या भोसड़ी वाले क्या बोल रहा था, अगर कि जितना भी मन करे वो नहीं बोल पाएंगे. There also appears to be some attempt at removing these restrictions by certain royal figures who aspire to move with the times by, for example, riding bicycles in public or dining in restaurants with ordinary people, as British journalists with some incredulity have reported from the Netherlands and Spain, respectively, in recent years, that some kings are doing these things. Just how far one can extend this process of liberation from royal restriction and remain loyal is an interesting question. Declan Quigley is pointing out that if at all these things are taken to its logical conclusion, there might not be any royalty left anyway. The second main theme of the African ethnography is that to be installed as king is to remove oneself from membership of any particular lineage. ये तो Indian context में नहीं है. Sometimes this is demonstrated in a banal way. At the installation, the kingmaker will advise the new king that now he belongs to all the people and must not treat those of his own lineage with any favoritism. हाँ, ये तो हमारा भी है. Sometimes, however, the symbolic breaking with normal kingship rules is achieved in a much more dramatic fashion through a radical transgression, which transforms his being and places him in an ambiguous zone where he is looked upon either as a sacred monster or as a dangerous sorcerer. Typically, the transgression involves committing incest, which no one else, of course, is allowed to do, or some act of cannibalism. The victim on occasion being a member of the new king's own lineage. It appears that only by breaking with convention in some such dramatic form is a king able to establish his credentials. क्या अजीब conditions है भाई ये अफ्रीका में. The king is thus made to stand outside the ordinary rules of kinship. Kingship and kinship are in this sense fundamentally opposed. Okay, kinship or kingship can't be same because for kingship so many weird things are to be done to separate him. और separate करने के लिए ये प्रमाण करने के लिए अब मैं तुम सबसे अलग हूँ. कभी कभी ये भी करना पड़ रहा है कि अपने कोई फैमिली मेंबर को खाना पड़ रहा है कुक करके या फिर अपने ही कोई फैमिली मेंबर के साथ सेक्स करना पड़ रहा है. ये था एटलीस्ट कुछ ट्राइब्स का अफ्रीका में custom. A third theme in the African ethnography or on kingship is that kings cannot be priests or ministers and priests cannot be kings. यहाँ पे it becomes relevant to India. The point was well made by Fortes in his 1967 presidential address to the RAI that the tenant cannot, by legal or moral or by religious prerogative, take possession of his office by his own unilateral action. Office is conferred by functionaries. Functionary कौन है हमारे context में? Office is conferred by functionaries who do not and often may not legitimately hold it themselves. Fortes adds that king and kingmakers must often be kept rigidly apart by taboos which prohibit them from sleeping in the same house or traveling together. The reason for this separation is that if they were confused, it might be possible to install oneself, and the first rule of office or legitimate position is that one can never confer it upon oneself. नरेंद्र मोदी रैंडमली खुद एक दिन सुबह डिक्लेयर नहीं कर सकता है कि भाई मैं प्राइम मिनिस्टर हूँ या फिर मैं प्राइम मिनिस्टर कैंडिडेट भी हूँ. इसलिए राजनाथ सिंह को 2014 में आके बोलना पड़ा था कि देखिए भाई हमारा कैंडिडेट है नरेंद्र मोदी, ये पास में बैठे हैं. It just is not socially acceptable. It's an universal phenomenon that no one can just say, hi guys, I am the candidate and I'm going to be king or prime minister tomorrow. The only ways in which one can install oneself are either by force or by pretension. हाँ वो तो है. And by definition, neither of these is legitimate. Office is always conferred by others. As such, it is effectively a matter of consent, even in those cases where kings appear to be particularly remote from the common people, or in those cases where either divine right or right of conquest is asserted. Such declarations inevitably require an additional element to be morally compelling, as opposed to being simply compelling by virtue of greater force. Morally compelling भी होना है. Royal office thus belongs to society in a quintessentially Durkheimian sense, that, as Evans Pritchard puts it for the Shilluk, that the people share in the kingship. People share in the kingship. क्योंकि बीजेपी जितना भी बड़ा या छोटा पार्टी हो, फिर भी राजनाथ सिंह को क्यों डिक्लेयर करना पड़ रहा है कि नरेंद्र मोदी कैंडिडेट होगा? क्योंकि राजनाथ सिंह ने भी कभी वोट जीता है, या फिर ही कम्स फ्रॉम अ पार्टी which gets some votes, or they are at least looking to get votes. So there is some kind of, even if बहुत far removed in a case of monarchy, or in the case of democracy not that far removed, there is some sort of skin in the game by the general population, and they are the so-called share in the kingship. Fortes also illustrates a number of other principles underlying both the transformative and inhibiting capacities of royal ritual. The transformation which takes place during royal installation ceremonies always brings with it a heavy responsibility. One might even say a terrible responsibility. As Fortes puts it, installation ceremonies fix upon the tenant accountability to society for the proper exercise of the functions vested in his office. Once installed, should the incumbent transgress this accountability by behaving improperly, he or she inevitably encounters a sanction. Depending on the nature of the transgression, the sanction typically takes the form of an ostracism, a social or symbolic death. And in the extreme case, the death may be literal. In this light, the office or status is something which belongs to the society. Okay? In this light, office or status is something which belongs to society and is temporarily bestowed on the individual provided he or she behaves properly. The kingship captures the king. जैसे कि बोला जाता है, you might not respect me, but you have to respect the office of the prime minister. One final theme which repeats itself in the African material on kingship is the existence of someone or some animal who has a function which mirrors that of the king, but is responsible for inauspicious qualities. Consider the following passage referring to the Mossi kingship in Burkina Faso, which highlights a dual ambivalent quality pivoting on auspiciousness, inauspiciousness, and fertility, sterility. One episode in the enthronement ritual is particularly noteworthy. A stallion, a ghoda, who is clearly the king's double, is enthroned at the same time as he is. The sovereign rides him during official ceremonies, and the horse and the king are the only male creatures in the palace, where the other members are women, young girls, circumcised boys, and female or castrated animals. Curiously, this stallion never couples with mares. In contrast to the king, he has no descendants. This permanent sterility is a kind of extension of the temporary sterility which affects the king during the final stage of his investiture. The new king spends a night with one of his predecessors' young widows, who is of childbearing age. However, he is forbidden from making her pregnant. From then on, the king will never again be permitted to have sexual relations with this woman, who nevertheless takes the title of king wife. ओह क्या अजीब कस्टम है भाई. अच्छा ये दिमाग में रख के टाइम वेस्ट करने का फ़ायदा नहीं है. अब चलो इंडिया में लौटते हैं. मगर फिर भी काफ़ी वियर्ड टेस्ट है कि तुमको प्रीवियस किंग के विडो के साथ सेक्स करना पड़ेगा मगर स्पर्म बाहर डालना पड़ेगा क्योंकि तुमको तो प्रेग्नेंट करने का परमिशन नहीं है. और मगर वो भी लास्ट बार होगा, वंस एंड लास्ट टाइम. ओके, द जनरेशन एंड अब्जॉर्प्शन ऑफ सिन. आप देखो कि someone or the other, how they become the repository, the container of ashubhness. The most, let me have some coffee. The most common academic representation of caste among Hindus in India and Nepal by South Asian and Western anthropologists and sociologists alike is normally in terms of a relatively unambiguous hierarchy. Brahmins, it is commonly claimed, are at the top because they are typically priests and as such are the paradigms of purity. Okay, this has been the argument so far. Dumo, no, not Dumo. I forgot. Yeah, I think it's Dumo's argument that why are Brahmins the most powerful, most evil? Why are Kushal Mehra, Vijita Mitra blaming Brahmins the most? Because historically, academia has taught us that Brahmins are at the top. Theoretically तो सब जगह बोला गया है ही theological text में, मगर also because they are the purest, they are considered the purest. बाकी hierarchy में जितने नीचे जाओगे उतना impure और impure ऐसे होगा, ठीक है. Untouchables are at the bottom because their function is to remove impurities of one kind or another and as a result they are permanently defiled. ये है argument. Other castes, it is usually claimed, ये टेबल हमको बाद में देखना पड़ेगा. Other castes can be ranked in between these two extremes. In this representation, impurity, evil, death, disorder, sin, auspiciousness, and sometimes simply dirt are channeled out of the community and out of the caste system, quote unquote caste system. Okay, interesting. Through a hereditary group or number of groups of low status. Okay, through a hereditary group or number of groups of low status scapegoats who are regarded by members of other castes as something less than human, as not fully social. Okay, therefore they are treated as the people who can be scapegoats and the repositories of whatever sin. Okay, in some contexts untouchables, in some contexts widows, bald widows were made bald anyway, and in some contexts even Brahmins. The most common explanation for the academic prominence of this picture is that it derives from the censuses of the colonial period when the British were concerned with establishing, for obvious political and administrative reasons, the order of social precedence. By marrying their own vertical notions of hierarchy with an ancient Hindu myth that the world was divided into four kinds of human beings, the four varnas, and by imposing this construct on the hundreds of thousands of local groups based on kinship, family and marriage, jatis, which they encountered on the ground, the concept of the Hindu caste system was irrevocably established. Listen to this paragraph once again. The most common explanation for the academic prominence of this picture is that it derives from the censuses of the colonial period when the British were concerned with establishing, for obvious political and administrative reasons, the order of social precedence. By marrying their own vertical notions, it's not proven that whether it was necessarily in practice the caste system was vertical or not. That was not taken into account. But the British had their own notions, which was a vertical way of looking at the social hierarchy. It might have been horizontal. Many people argue that caste system is horizontal. But then you can argue that why are then some castes richer or privileged? तो वो privilege उसके caste identity की वजह से नहीं आया है. वो किसी ना किसी तरह से उसने land हड़प लिया है. जो प्रिविलेज आता है वो हमेशा लैंड ओनर होने से होता है और कोई अदर आइडेंटिटी से नहीं. By marrying their own vertical notions of hierarchy with an ancient Hindu myth that the world was divided into four kinds of human beings, the four varnas, and by imposing this construct on the hundreds of thousands of local groups based on kinship and marriage, which are jatis. Okay, listen to what he's saying, that we have now discussed. I've recently learned that you can't even fit different jatis into specific varnas. So that is exactly what Declan Quigley is pointing out here, that the British were using that vertical way of looking at varnas and imposing that construct on the hundreds and thousands of jatis, which they encountered on the ground, the concept of the Hindu caste system was irrevocably established. He's saying now it was established. There are fundamental difficulties with this concept, however, of which 3 will be highlighted here. First, the description of caste as a Hindu phenomenon prejudices the comparative quest for comparable forms of social organization outside South Asia. Listen to this argument, guys. The description of caste as a Hindu phenomenon prejudices. It ends up giving you a prejudiced research. If you are in your comparative quest for comparable forms of social organization outside South Asia, that is the problem with using the word caste. Okay, then it becomes a distinctly Hindu-Indian phenomenon, whereas it should be called statusism. Status के basis पे कोई ना किसी के साथ bad behavior कर रहा है. Okay. Second, while ordinary Hindus themselves often articulate the same kind of hierarchical ladder when pressed to present an intellectual model of caste, they tend to produce quite different notions of caste order in everyday speech and action, as I will show below now. Listen to this interesting thing. He's saying that किसी को और पूछ लो, बातों में तो बोलेगा कि हाँ भाई हम तो एकदम बिलीव करते हैं ये हायरार्किकल वर्टिकल स्ट्रक्चर में ही, मगर काम में ऐसा दिखता नहीं है, which is even more interesting. Third, the picture of an unambiguous ladder with untouchable groups at the bottom deflects attention away from the fact that other groups and individuals in caste-organized societies also perform crucial scapegoat functions which untouchable groups do not and may not perform. This fact is one of the most important clues as to how caste works. Yeah, now this is not to say that untouchables therefore did not suffer. This is to look at exactly what exactly caste is and what casteism is, so that we can really keep anything of caste system if that is not in fact harmful for anyone, if it does benefit someone. In my opinion, it does not really give us any benefits in these days, because no one, at least in Bengal, I don't see anyone having maintained anything of their caste or jati hereditary. So our chief ministers are all Brahmins. क्या उखाड़ लिया है? ममता बनर्जी, बुद्धदेव भट्टाचार्य. ठीक है, अगर कहीं पे है, अगर किसी को बेनिफिट मिल रहा है तो भाई ठीक है, as long as you don't behave badly towards anyone. But where there is bad behavior coming out of the caste system, so that we can track it precisely, accurately and then solve the problem with clear precision. उसके लिए हमको exactly जानना है कि क्या है ये चीज़. For that we are reading these things. Not to say that no, untouchables के साथ कोई खराब काम नहीं हुआ है, बिल्कुल हुआ है, होता है अभी भी. The problem with the intellectual representation of caste as Brahmins at the top, untouchables at the bottom, quote unquote, given by virtually every commentator on caste, is that it obscures this clue and prevents one from seeing the basic principles which make caste both different from other forms of social organization and also in some ways similar to other forms of social organization. Very well said. It is not an exaggeration to say that the representation of caste, whether one means a very abstract model of the caste system, quote unquote, whatever that means, caste system, or a more empirical model of local caste systems, that is local caste organized communities, it is not an exaggeration to say that the representation of caste in that way, as a hierarchical ladder arranged more or less like the teams in a football league table, renders the understanding of how caste works impossible. ये ऐसे टेबल के तरह देखने से हमको नहीं समझ में आएगा. That is what Declan Quigley is arguing. There are various ways in which this could be demonstrated. For example, one could look at various studies of what Hindu priests do and how they are regarded. My own favorite illustration comes from Parry's work and concerns the common representation of Brahmins and untouchables as polar opposites. Some members of untouchable castes could be described as priests, and virtually all could be in certain contexts, okay? Some members of untouchable castes could be described as priests, and virtually all could be considered priests in some certain contexts, insofar as their function is the ritual removal of pollution. Obviously, pollution as a ritual substance, quite different from physical dirt, obviously, cannot be removed except by ritual means. Untouchables are generally not members of Brahmin lineages. Indeed, this is normally seen as a sociological impossibility since they are supposed to be at opposite ends of the social spectrum. However, there is an exception. The so-called Maha-Brahmins of North India, a particular caste many of whose members work as funeral priests. Though the funeral priest is a Brahmin, he is to all intents and purposes treated much like an untouchable. Through his importunate demands on the mourners he serves, the sad people who are suffering at someone's death, उनको जो सर्व करना पड़ रहा है इस आदमी को, because of that he reveals not only his own nature but also the greed and malevolence of the ghost he embodies. क्या प्रॉब्लम है? ये देखो, डूमो ने ही एकेडेमिया से तुम लोगों को जो कास्टिज्म के बारे में जो डिस्कोर्सेस दिखता है, ये सब इन डूमो भाई साहब का बनाया हुआ है, जिसको निकोलस बी डर्क्स और डेक्लन क्विगली डिबंक करते हैं. Dumo states that this group are really untouchables because of their association with death. Okay. However, Paddy, insists that this group are really Brahmins because of their priestliness. Even if this is a question of points of view, there is something very odd going on if the fundamental characteristic of the so-called caste system is a polar opposition between Brahmins and untouchables. Paddy agrees with Dumo about this. And yet there is a category of people who appear, depending on how you look, to be simultaneously at the top of the ladder and they're considered at the bottom of the ladder. वो untouchable भी है, Brahmin भी है. ये कैसे हो रहा है? Then I guess we are looking at caste system wrong, right? That therefore let's look at it in some other way. That is what Declan Quigley is proposing here. If it was just a case of one small... Acha, Anand Sridhar, you bring out an interesting point here that you are saying that in southern India, funeral priests are not considered untouchable, but I have heard some other kinds of Brahmins are considered actually so untouchable that when they are passing by the road, Gaumatra is distributed on that place. If that Brahmin comes to your house for some reason, for bhiksha or something, or for some work even, you allow him to... come, you talk to him, you get your business done, but after he goes away, you again sprinkle some Gaumatra around. What kind of Brahman is that? Because I have heard that, I've read in some paper itself that kind of a Brahman exists. Okay, what Brahman is that? But it's not about just these funeral Brahmins even. Rabindranath Thakur's caste, which was him being a Pirali Brahmin, even that was considered a very sort of a disgusting kind of a Brahmin. Okay. Their original surname was Kushari. They became the elite by doing business with the British, etc. Then they got that surname Thakur. Paddy, okay. Untouchables in the sense that they all appear to have their... kahan gaya? Yeah. If it was just a case of one small exceptional group, we might be able to pretend that they were some kind of anomaly and as such not at all significant. The problem is, however, that the more one looks at all priests in Hindu communities, the more they all begin to have characteristics which are more often associated with untouchables, in the sense that they all appear to have as their primary function the removal of other people's inauspicious qualities, ashubhness, ashubh characteristics. What would be a great translation for inauspicious qualities? Ashubh charitra. Paddy's findings are particularly impressive on this point. The priest's status is highly equivocal, and he is seen not so much as the acme of purity as an absorber of sin. Just as the low caste specialists remove the biological impurities of their patrons, so the Brahman priest removes their spiritual impurity by taking their sins upon himself through the act of accepting their gifts. I emphasize that these remarks apply to the entire range of priestly occupations followed by the Brahmins of Banaras and not just to the funeral priests, and I note that such notions recall the set of ideas which underlie the Vedic sacrifice. It must be emphasized that I am referring here to the category of priests who are defined by function and not the category of Brahmins who are defined by membership of groups arranged by kinship and marriage. Many members of the Brahman caste have always had non-priestly occupations. Conversely, many members of non-Brahmin castes perform priestly functions. Raheja illustrates this idea in a study of a small village called Pahansu in Uttar Pradesh, where she examines the nature of prestations referred to as dan, which are made to members of specialist castes for ritual services. Pahansu Brahmins are reluctant to accept dan. They don't want to accept dan. They know very well that it diminishes their shakti and their tej. Yet within the village context, it is their appropriate obligation, parmaya, to take dan from their Gujar jajmans. This hesitancy, the same awareness of the dangers, also characterizes the attitudes of the barber and the sweeper about accepting दान in पहनशु. Okay, ये सेम कारण की वजह से बार्बर और स्वीपर भी दान नहीं लेना चाहता है, क्योंकि तुम दान ले रहे हो, इसका मतलब है कि वो गंदगी तुम में भी घुस गया है. Okay, let's see what Sridhar said. They might be, but I haven't seen them. Okay. I learned this from a priest who came to do my grandfather's 13th day death anniversary prayers. Aichi. Acha. Shuvacha and Ashaucha, dada. Oh yeah. Right. Auspicious and inauspicious. Okay. Right. Saucha and Asaucha. Exactly. That is why after someone passes away, at least in Bengal we use this term that uska bhi ashauch chal raha hai. If Raheja, Paddy and others, for example, Heasterman, Schulman, are right that the basic logic of Hindu priesthood is to be the vessel of someone else's inauspiciousness, a number of obvious questions emerge. Perhaps the first is, on whose behalf is inauspiciousness generally removed? किसके तरफ से ये representative होके inauspicious ले रहा है अपने पे? The short answer to this seems to be anyone who has the resources to command someone else to perform listen to this. The short answer seems to be this. Anyone who has the resources to command someone else to perform a purificatory ritual, but with the added twist that those who have more such resources at their disposal also appear to be those most in need of purging. Okay. बहुत कठिन चीज़ है. पहली बात तो ये है जिसका पैसा है ये प्यूरिफिकेटरी रिचुअल कराने का उनके बिहाफ पे, बट विद द एडेड ट्विस्ट दैट दोज हु हैव मोर सच रिसोर्सेज एट देयर डिस्पोजल ऑल्सो अपीयर टू बी दोज मोस्ट इन नीड ऑफ पर्जिंग. ठीक है, जिसके पास ये रिसोर्स है उन्हीं को हम देख सकते हैं कि वी एंड अप सीइंग दैट दे सीम टू बी द पीपल मोस्ट इन नीड ऑफ this purging of inauspiciousness, whether by their actions or whether they think it themselves or whether the society believes so. Okay, that who are the most blamable people kind of at the drop of a hat? Ambani, Narendra Modi. Paradoxically, the most dangerous position of all, charged with inauspiciousness which must be repeatedly removed, is simultaneously the most auspicious, that of the king. Without the purificatory mechanism of his priests, the Hindu king accumulates the evil and death of his people to become, as the Sanskritist Heasterman exquisitely puts it, quote, as great an abomination as 10 brothels or even as the keeper of 10,000 slaughterhouses. एक मनुष्य जिसका 10 brothels है या फिर 10,000 slaughter houses है, वो रखने का जितना पाप होता वैसा पाप आ जाता है एक हिंदू किंग में. ठीक है, प्यूरिफिकेटरी मैकेनिज्म्स, लिसन टू दिस सेंटेंस वंस अगेन. विदाउट द प्यूरिफिकेटरी मैकेनिज्म, अगर वो प्रीस्ट वो प्यूरिफिकेटरी राइट्स नहीं करता तो द संस्कृतिस्ट हीस्टरमैन पॉइंट्स आउट, quoting texts, that the Hindu king would have accumulated the evil and death of his people to become as great an abomination as if he holds owns 10 brothels, as if he is 10 brothels, or he is the keeper of 10,000 slaughterhouses. Heasterman's implication is that while nearly everyone is the carrier of inauspiciousness which must be shed, ascetics, since they do not engage with others, are significantly free from this problem. Only people who don't have inauspiciousness all the time in some degree are ascetics. Sannyasis, okay? They are not in this conversation. But everyone else, since they have inauspiciousness which must be shed, the king is the mountain head of this danger. वो तो सबसे ज़्यादा resources उसके पास है, तो सबसे ज़्यादा inauspiciousness भी उसका ही है. A similar interpretation emerges from Raheja's portrayal of what is sometimes referred to as the Jajmani system, social and ritual relations which center on the dominant landowning caste. It is not just that the king's power puts him in a pivotal political position, but rather that the king, as the ritually central figure भी तो है ना, ritually central figure is inescapably connected to everyone. And since every relation requires periodic purging of inauspiciousness, the king has more to purge than anyone else and must therefore command the most elaborate and costly purificatory rituals. ठीक है? But put differently, untouchables are not, as they are typically portrayed, repositories of defilement and decay. They are merely channels through whom death and inauspiciousness are passed out of or ordered out of society to the untamable outside, so-called. So we are not saying that therefore the people who are considered untouchables, they are not suffering. We are looking into exactly why they are being considered untouchable so that we can solve the problem properly. Put differently, untouchables are not, as they are typically portrayed, repositories of defilement and decay. They are merely channels through whom death and inauspiciousness are passed out or ordered out of society to the untamable outside. Without these channels, without ritual expiation and the periodic emptying out of inauspiciousness, evil, sin, and death would accumulate at the very center of society, which is the king. Ladder-like representations of caste, the vertical ones, hierarchical vertical ones, simply cannot cope with this need to expel inauspiciousness because they fail to show that Brahman and untouchable groups are in a structurally analogous position with respect to the king or dominant caste. This is why, so when it comes to the dominant caste, whoever is the dominant in any place, or when it comes to the king, in relation to them, Raja और untouchable का basically same ही stature है भाई. Brahmin और untouchable का same stature है in the context of their relationship with whoever is the dominant caste around them or the king. What the fuck? Listen to this argument. This is going to piss off both commies because it's debunking their arguments, and it's going to piss off actually casteist trads as well. Ladder-like representations of castes simply cannot cope with this need to expel inauspiciousness because they fail to show that Brahman and untouchable groups are in a structurally analogous position when it comes to with respect to the king or the dominant caste. This is why the Mahabrahmans can be Brahmans and untouchable simultaneously. In relation to their patrons, they are both. The alternative patron meaning whoever's funding them to do the puja. अरे आनंद उसको जाने मत बोलो वो मेरा एल्गोरिथम ड्राइव कर रहा है दिस इज व्हाई आई लव हिम ही कमेंट्स सो मच ही पिसेस एवरीवन ऑफ पीपल कीप debating him it's all good for the channel's algorithm structurally analogous position with respect to the king or dominant caste this is why the Mahabrahmans can be Brahmans and untouchable simultaneously. Okay, why? In relation to their patrons, they are both. The alternative representation of caste proposed by Raheja, figure 1, which we are going to see now, makes sense of this structural feature without having to suppress any other ethnographic information. Figure 1 कहाँ पे है? ये है figure 1. देखो figure 1 क्या बोलता है? A model of caste organization from the viewpoint of the royal center. Okay, this is not a vertical ladder-like representation. This is based on what is your role or what is your dealing with the king. What is your relationship with the king? किंग के ज़िंदगी में तुम्हारा क्या वैल्यू है या फिर यूज़ है उस बेसिस पे ये डायग्राम बनाया गया हुआ है. लेट्स सी व्हाट इट शोज. द एरोज शो द फ्लो ऑफ इनऑस्पिशियसनेस टू दोज हु आर अदर इन रेस्पेक्ट टू lineages of the kingly caste whose members are the principal patrons or judgmans in the community. Members of all castes are thus potentially priests to kingly patrons. Equally, members of all castes attempt to replicate the kingly model when they are themselves patrons. Very important line. A full model of caste would therefore be three-dimensional and molecule-like with multiple centers of patronage. Absolutely true. We know this, right? This happens in every society, in every field, in every profession because there's always the issue of aspirational models, right? जो कि हम डिस्कस कर रहे थे कुछ दिन पहले के लिटिल किंग्स. ओके, जो कोई राजा नहीं है वो अगर थोड़ा बहुत ज़मींदार भी बन गया है, अगर नॉर्थ कलकत्ता में उसका कोई बोनेदी बाड़ी था 1800s में, तब वो राजा खेलता है. ओके, जैसे कि कोई भी अगर कुछ भी काम करे, दे ट्राई टू रेप्लिकेट द एग्जैक्ट थिंग्स that someone very much more qualified or very much more powerful in that field would do, right? Like when we do let's say a rock band does a cover of some other band, or anyone that does covers of an Arijit Singh song. Why are they doing it? Because they are trying to go through that same feelings that Arijit Singh might really get when he performs his song in front of 1 lakh people. Even if you are performing that same song in front of 500 people, but you are trying to get that vibe. That is that aspirational model, that little king wala thing. Okay, like the proper big floodlight में जो neighborhood में tennis ball का cricket tournament होता है, उसमें floodlight commentary ये सब क्यों होता है? Because they are trying to get that vibe of a real life cricketer playing cricket. Okay, तो वैसा ही king like behavior, king like relationship with other people, king like funding or patronizing of some rituals etc. वो हर कोई करने लगता है जिसके पास थोड़ा बहुत पैसा आ गया है, ये थोड़ा कुछ राइट्स और रिचुअल्स करने का. Therefore, ये सब बोलने का मतलब क्या है? The point therefore being, it's not just king and his relationship with these few castes and different professions. It's everyone in every profession behaving like a king and therefore having that kind of a relationship with everyone around him. Okay, that's the brilliance of this argument here. the small kings are like RWH chairmen of your housing complexes. Yes. Okay, let's look at the diagram properly. King and other patrons of kingly lineages, their relationship with specific relationship with and remember these arrows are his distributing his inauspiciousness away. Okay, to Brahmin lineages, outsiders, married sisters and their husbands, lineages of other castes, barbers, etc. lineages, because the barber is also giving him that perfect haircut. He's a royal barber. Okay, ये यहाँ पे important क्यों है? Not randomly any barber. We are not talking about your barber. We are talking about Modi's barber here. Okay, तो राजा का बार्बर, उसका लीनिएज, राजा के सामने जो अनटचेबल है उसका लीनिएज, राजा का ब्राह्मण का लीनिएज, तो इन सब के बीच में काइंड ऑफ एक हॉराइजॉन्टल डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ लेबर है. तो इन विच केस द ब्राह्मण इज बीइंग कंपेयर्ड टू द बेसिकली द बार्बर, बिकॉज द ब्राह्मण इज टेकिंग अवे द सिन ऑफ द किंग, डूइंग स्पेसिफिक राइट्स, टेकिंग अ फी फॉर दैट. The barber is cutting the hair of the king in a very specific way, even in a ritualistic way in some cases, and also is in a way purifying him. Purifying him of what? Not spirit in this case. He's purifying him of bad looks, of looking like me. Okay, so everyone around a king is taking away some inauspiciousness of a king. क्या अजीब research है. This is pretty original stuff. Okay, now let's start the paragraph here. Let me have some coffee now. M. Shastri, what he's saying here, I want to say that it's so perfect what he's saying here, and I think I will have to do a live stream about this specifically. That I was telling you some days back, that I'm listening to an introduction to sociology full course lecture, about 30 lectures है उसमें, of New York University. It's uploaded on YouTube for free. उसमें जिस दिन का डिस्कशन टॉपिक है ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, सोशल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, that has nothing to do with casteism or India or caste Hinduism. Okay, it's they don't even mention caste even once, but the historical evidences, logic, framework of thinking that the professor shows or explains to show how social organizations take place or form, you will notice that yes, that is exactly how caste system or jati varna systems also operated or came about in the first place. So what we are talking about while criticizing these systems is the bad behavior that comes out of it. Caste, kingship and comparison. Most anthropologists, even the most die-hard defenders of understanding ethnography in its local context, can see that there might be some merit in comparing kingship in, say, West Africa with kingship in, say, Southeast Asia or medieval Europe or some Pacific island or whatever. Of course, one might come to the conclusion that kingship in each of these places was quite different in character, perhaps even that they were really different institutions, just as one might come to the conclusion that the family in different places is quite different, or that marriage does not everywhere carry the same implications. But I think it unlikely that most would deny the possible fruitfulness of looking at kingship in different settings, because comparing is always good. Observers of caste, however, tend to proceed in just this isolationist way. Look at this statement. What a brilliant sentence. That in other situations, everyone is, while discussing kingship, everyone is comparing this kingship to that kingship, etc. When it comes to caste, all of a sudden we are talking about only Hindu India. That is the main fucking problem. Observers of caste, however, tend to proceed in just this isolationist way. They tend to argue that caste is unique to Hindu India and that comparisons with social formations elsewhere are misguided. और इसमें बहुत सारे कास्टिस्ट ट्रैट्स का भी प्रॉब्लम है. वो बोलते हैं कि नहीं भाई, वर्णा और जाति सिस्टम इतना ही बढ़िया था कि वो इंडिया के अलावा और कहीं हुआ ही नहीं. There is no doubt that certain comparisons have been misleading. For example, the parallel with racist stratification. हाँ, जब कंपेयर करना था तब ये चुतियापा के साथ कंपेयर कर दिया. The parallel with racist stratification in Southern Africa and the southern states of America, or the characterization of a caste as a system of exploitation. The flaws in these arguments were ruthlessly exposed by Dumo. However, Dumo's alternative vision, which has dominated academic representations of caste for over 30 years, excludes the possibility of finding caste outside India altogether, because Dumo is saying that ये तो सिर्फ इंडिया में होता है. Which is, quote, the supremacy of the priest is an Indian fact which has remained unexportable. India has exported quasi-caste rather than caste proper, end quote. This is Dumo's view. Even if Dumo were right about the supremacy of the Indian priest, and this is highly suspect as we have seen, the idea that caste therefore defies comparison with some other place seems very peculiar as a matter of general principle. And yet the idea that caste is confined to Hinduism and South Asia remains very deeply rooted even among those who purport to be Dumo's critics. Okay, जो लोग डुमो को क्रिटिसाइज कर रहे हैं वो भी बोल रहे हैं नहीं फिर भी कास्टिज्म तो सिर्फ हिंदू कैस्ट सिस्टम ही है. If caste organization is a form of kingship in the manner suggested above, जो कि इन्होंने अभी तक आर्ग्यू कर लिया है, this provides a way of using caste as a comparative. If caste organization is a form of kingship in the manner suggested above, however, this provides a way of using caste as a comparative construct without succumbing to the reductionism of those who assimilated to either race or class. Okay? तो हम कंपेयर भी करेंगे मगर ये रेस और क्लास के साथ इक्वेट कर देने का चुतियापा भी नहीं करेंगे. क्लास का एक बहुत स्पेसिफिक डिस्टिंक्ट कैरेक्टर है मगर वो डिस्टिंक्ट कैरेक्टर सिर्फ इंडिया में डिस्टिंक्ट है और मतलब डिस्टिंक्ट जियोग्राफिकली नहीं है. वो डिस्टिंक्ट कैरेक्टर है जो वो क्या है वो देख के हम वो डिस्टिंक्ट कैरेक्टर और कहाँ कहाँ पे है वो ढूंढेंगे मगर वो क्लास और रेस नहीं है. द आर्ग्यूमेंट कैन बी समराइज्ड इन 3 propositions. Caste is a form of kingship. Kingship can only be explained comparatively, meaning comparing with other societies. That is a recurring feature of social structure not anchored in any particular culture. Caste as a form of kingship can therefore only be explained satisfactorily by referencing to something other than Hinduism or Brahmanism or South Asian culture more generally. These 3 are Declan Quigley's main arguments here. A corollary of this argument is that the fundamental principle of caste cannot be Pace Dumont, that as Dumont says that Hindu priests are pure, quote unquote. Caste organization and ideology do indeed revolve around a fundamental principle, and this principle is crucially concerned with purity. It is not, however, as we have seen, the priest's purity which underpins the whole. The role of priests is to absorb the inauspiciousness which is continually and necessarily generated by kingship. Raja is the main issue here. Yeah, the status of the Raja is the main contributing factor into the discourse, to the way people view caste system, not the so-called purity of just the priest. The role of priests, as we have seen, principle is. It is not, however, as we have seen, the priest's purity which underpins the whole. The role of priests is to absorb the inauspiciousness which is continually and necessarily generated by kingship, to channel it out of the society, and thus to be the instruments to facilitate repeatedly the renewal and perfection of what Geertz has called the exemplary center. क्योंकि center को तो एकदम perfect, flawless हमको दिखाना है. Which is why Modi sometimes screws things up कि फोटोशूट ऐसे परफेक्टली दिखाने गया कि लोगों को पता ही चल गया कि ये तो भाई फालतू का फोटोशूट था. पीछे मतलब खाली का कार्डबोर्ड दे के दिखा दिया कि क्लासरूम में बच्चे पढ़ रहे हैं, मगर इसलिए प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस भी करना बंद कर दिए हैं. प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंसेज में सारे के सारे जर्नलिस्ट, किसी को तो कोई अच्छे इंटेंशन से प्रश्न नहीं करना है, सबको गॉटचा सवाल प्रश्न पूछना है. तो बहुत कम तुमको उत्तर नहीं देंगे क्योंकि मुझे अपना परफेक्ट पर्सोना दिखाना है. तो तुम चुतियों के साथ बात करने जाऊंगा तो मेरा परफेक्ट पर्सोना कैसे रहेगा? मैं तुमको भोसड़ी वाली बोलने का मन करेगा, तो उससे अच्छा मैं प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस ना करूँ. दैट इज व्हाट इज बीइंग शोड हियर. Has called the exemplary center. The African principle that the kingship should be pure or perfect seems then also to underlie caste. Now, conclusion. With regard to the African ethnography, De Hoysch hypothesizes that where sacred kings are secluded or put to a symbolic death, they are charged with and channel the evil, dangerous aspects of the sacred. While there are variations on this theme, he argues that there is one central theme, and it can be stated simply enough, which is, what does one do with that human being who is charged with articulating the social order and the natural order? ऐसे आदमी के साथ हम क्या करें जिसके ऊपर ये पूरा दायित्व दे दिया गया है कि कास्ट ये आदमी ठीक करेगा, सोशल ऑर्डर ये ठीक करेगा, लॉ एंड ऑर्डर ये ठीक करेगा, सजा ये देगा, विथ ऑफ कोर्स कंसल्टेशंस फ्रॉम अदर पीपल. Does one place him at the center of the society or outside the society? Or inside and outside at the same time? If one employs this question to examine caste organization in South Asia, it may appear at first to be resolved in favor of inside. अगर हम इंडिया में देखें या फिर साउथ एशिया में देखें तो राजा को इनसाइड रखा जा रहा है, बट द कंटिन्यूअस चैनलिंग अवे ऑफ इनऑस्पिशियसनेस थ्रू द मीडियम्स ऑफ वेरियस रिचुअल स्पेशलिस्ट्स मेंबर्स ऑफ जस्ट अबाउट एनी अदर कास्ट गिव्स हिंदू किंगशिप an inherently ambivalent quality strictly comparable to its African counterpart. The matter is complicated, however, by the fact that virtually everyone else in Hindu society seems to share in this ambivalence. Whereas the African literature singles out the king as being simultaneously hemmed in by the perfection of his position and charged with the inauspiciousness of the community, the literature on Hindu society has continually stressed that this is everybody's problem, that in a sense everyone is to be treated like a king in certain circumstances. My own preferred representation of caste systems, while no doubt a highly abstract model, mirrors this emic representation. Okay, emic का मतलब क्या है ये थोड़ा गूगल करके हम तुमको दिखा देते हैं. emic थोड़ा important word है. emic और etic दो word है. Some researchers use etic to refer to objective or outsider accounts. Okay, like me taking a scholarly approach to tantra, let's say, that would be the etic view, and emic to refer to subjective or insider accounts. So Rajarshi Nandi's view would be considered the emic view, the practitioner's view. He's the insider to this. Or when I'm talking about music, mine is the emic view. Or let's say if someone's a critique or writes reviews on music, like Sir Roger Scruton has written 2 books on the philosophy of music, never made music himself. He is the etic view. Okay. So my own preferred representation of caste systems, while no doubt a highly abstract model, mirrors this emic representation by stressing the endless replication of the structure of kingship and the consequent never-ending, listen to this, mirrors this emic representation by stressing the endless replication of the structure of kingship and therefore the consequent never-ending preoccupation with inauspiciousness and purity. तो अगर वो मतलब लोगों का रहने का जो सोसाइटी है, मतलब फ्लैट्स, उसका भी हेड का एग्जांपल लिया जाए तो उसका भी ऐसा तो बहुत सारे डिमांड्स रहते हैं. तो let's be serious and just consider kingship here. The consequent never-ending preoccupation with inauspiciousness and purity. जो कोई जहाँ पे भी लिटिल किंग बन रहा है उसका भी तब से ही preoccupation with inauspiciousness and purity आ जा रहा है. Hocart formulated this clearly, which is, quote, the king state is not state with capital S, not governance, okay? King ka avastha. The king state is reproduced in miniature by his vassals. A farmer has his court, consists of the personages most essential to the ritual, and so present even in the smallest community, the barber, the washerman, the drummers and so forth. सबका ये प्रोफेशन करने का आदमी है, ठीक है? जो कि ड्रमर है उसका भी ऐसा कुछ, जो ड्रमर्स का हेड है उसका भी ऐसा कोई उसके आसपास कोई है जो कि उसका सबऑर्डिनेट है. Drawing parallels between traditional Fiji and the caste societies of South Asia, Hocart argued that the king state is an organization for prosperity by the due observance of traditional rules. ये है मेन स्टेटमेंट, एकदम सही बोल दिया है यहाँ पे. The king's avastha is an organization for prosperity by the due observance of traditional rules. Sukhasya mulam dharma, dharmasya mulam artha, arthasya mulam rajya. Primary among these rules is the repetitive performance of rites, the purpose of which is to regenerate the kingship by removing any pollution which accumulates at the royal center. From this perspective, the priest, whether he is a Brahmin or an untouchable, or both at the same time, is always a vessel for removing the pollution or inauspiciousness of those who are charged, quote unquote, charged with articulating the social order and the natural order. Okay, removing the pollution or inauspiciousness of whom? That person who is charged, जिसका दायित्व ये है, articulating the social order and the natural order, as De Hoysch puts it. If we call such people kings, it must be remembered that where there is caste, everyone is trying to emulate the rituals of the kings and to replicate their associated courts of priests. Absolutely. But if the farmer and the washerman and all and sundry can have their courts too, जैसे कि था, albeit fleetingly and with rather reduced magnificence, वो तो है, थोड़ा थोड़ा miniature में, simulation में है, ठीक है. So too does their aspiration bring with it the dark side of kingship and the need to deal with it. Where there is caste organization, it is not only the great king who is imprisoned by the demands of office and scapegoated when these demands are not fulfilled. This is the fate of quite ordinary people too. Most interpretations of caste would have us believe that pollution beliefs and practices among Hindus are oriented along a purity-impurity axis, with purity being seen as a priestly quality in the sense of a rarefied form of sacredness, pavitrata. Most prosaically, pollution beliefs and practices expresses the aspiration to keep some lineages more kingly or noble than others, to separate them from others by creating a sacred space around them. To see this, one needs to appreciate the logic of what Raheja has called the poison in the gift. Okay, राजा जो गिफ्ट दे रहा है, जो आर्म्स दे रहा है प्रीस्ट को, उसी से एज इफ उसी से वो इनऑस्पिशियसनेस भी गिफ्ट के साथ ही प्रीस्ट के पास चला गया. So Raheja is another famous sociologist, is calling that the poison in the gift, the transferal of inauspiciousness. Whenever a prestation, meaning priest ka kaam, whenever a prestation is made by a patron to a, not a gift to the priest, okay? Whenever a prestation is made by a patron to a priest for the performance of a ritual on the former's behalf, on the behalf of the king. What is being expressed here is the need to keep those who are at the center of social life, the patrons, free from the inauspiciousness, the evil, sin, death, which flows over, quote unquote, whenever connections between people are transformed by the ordinary course of human events. It is then not simply those who are at or beyond the community's margins who are society's scapegoats. The center is also perceived to be dangerous and the royal exemplary center is extraordinarily perilous, to such an extent that the institution of kingship provides a kind of ideological complement to the institution of untouchability. Okay, the institution of kingship provides a kind of ideological complement to the institution of untouchability, which is, in other words, he's saying that ये जो किंग होने का जो इंस्टीट्यूशन है उसी के वजह से अनटचेबिलिटी भी हो रहा है, एटलीस्ट हो रहा था when he is observing. You may say that it may have been born because some people were the pre-Vedic tribes, etc. Some people were doing were involved in professions which involved handling unhygienic situations. But when that situation did get codified into religious texts and was being followed by everyone, तब इसका अंडरस्टैंडिंग और जस्टिफिकेशन क्या था वो हमको पकड़ना पड़ेगा. तो वो था ये कि किंग है तो इनऑस्पिशियसनेस किसी को ट्रांसफर करना है, नॉट बिकॉज ऑफ रेस और क्लास. अब किसी के ऊपर इनऑस्पिशियसनेस थोपोगे तब तो वो इकोनॉमिकली भी पुअर रहेगा, बट दैट इज़ नॉट द मेन डायरेक्ट कॉज. वो गरीब है इसलिए उसको उसके ऊपर इनऑस्पिशियसनेस नहीं थोपा जा रहा है. उसके ऊपर इनऑस्पिशियसनेस थोपा जा रहा है बार बार, इसलिए वो गरीब है. The center is also perceived to be dangerous, and the royal exemplary center is extraordinarily perilous, to such an extent that the institution of kingship provides a kind of ideological complement to the institution of untouchability. सेलेंस, अरे यही है वो मार्शल सेलेंस, ओके, जिसके बारे में हम कुछ दिन पहले बात कर रहे थे, जिसका डिबेट हुआ था गणना तो बेसिकली के साथ ऑन द टॉपिक ऑफ whether Hawaiian indigenous people were in fact a myth-driven society or not, and whether it's okay for Salins to consider them a myth-driven society. Remember, so Salins once produced a clever dictum to the effect that cannibalism is symbolic even when it is real, while Geertz has claimed that the real is as imagined as the imaginary. Well said. Cannibalism में symbolism तो है, even if someone is actually being eaten, वो सिम्बॉलिकली किया जा रहा है, तो उसको अगर हम समझे तो हम प्रॉब्लम को सच में सॉल्व कर पाएंगे और समझा पाएंगे कि भाई देखो ये सिम्बॉलिज्म के वजह से तुम इसको मार के खा रहे थे, तो ये सिम्बॉलिज्म का कुछ अगर हम अलग उपाय ढूंढ ले तो तुमको इनको मार के खाना नहीं पड़ेगा. दैट इज़ हाउ आई थिंक द बैड बिहेवियर्स कमिंग आउट ऑफ कास्टिज्म शुड बी सॉल्व्ड. Even when it is, and as Geertz has said, that the real is as imagined as the imaginary. Nietzsche would like this. With pollution beliefs, the underlying formula of these two statements can be neatly reversed, which is pollution beliefs may appear symbolic, but they are in fact quite real. Yes, क्योंकि तो अब अनटचेबल का जिंदगी तो झंड हो ही रहा था. Insofar as they are not optional, especially, right? In the last analysis, they are the only means of creating seemingly permanent social institutions for which kingship provides the paradigm. So, who was benefiting from it? The society in general was benefiting from keeping untouchables as untouchables, क्योंकि उसके वजह से राजा का जो मतलब एक डिवाइन स्टैचर था वो मेंटेन किया जा रहा था, क्योंकि उनका इनऑस्पिशियसनेस कहीं पर पुरोहित के ऊपर, कहीं पर अनटचेबल्स के ऊपर जा ही रहा है, दलित के ऊपर जा रहा है, दलित नहीं शूद्रों के ऊपर जा रहा है. मगर वो सोसाइटी, वो स्टेबल सोशल इंस्टीट्यूशन सबको ही चाहिए. तो कभी ना कभी एटलीस्ट sometime or the other, in some places, everyone might not have had a problem with it, but also many times it has happened that someone or the other has always said that this institution needs to be gotten rid of. Even Sri Purandara Dasaru, from so many centuries back, from about 500 years back, said that let's not do this. Let's get rid of this situation. Let's not treat someone badly just because of their family lineage. Purandara Dasaru didn't need a PhD in gender studies to say that. For elaboration on the theory of caste, अच्छा ये तो footnote है, देखते हैं footnote में कुछ interesting चीज़ें हैं. I am grateful to the participants of at seminars in St. Andrews, Queen's University. Okay. Hereafter I choose to write king rather than the monarch or king or queen, both because of the extensive literature on kingship and because I am primarily concerned with the principle of kingship rather than with any particular incumbents of the position of monarch. In any case, the quote-unquote king does not have to be a person since he is primarily a symbol. He can be an animal, as the expression scapegoat itself indicates. Still today, at the annual Puck Fair in Killorglin, County Kerry in the Republic of Ireland, a wild black he-goat is captured every summer, crowned king and married to a local virgin girl who becomes his queen. What the fuck? This goat king reigns over the village for 3 days before being released or expelled to the wild again. That the equation of kingship with inauspiciousness is not the prevalent conception of monarchy in the contemporary Europe. In not contemporary Europe would appear to be connected with the fact that modern Western monarchs have been divested of their most important ritual functions. Yeah. Whether this is primarily the result of the emergence of strong centralized states or the overwhelming nature of scientific thought is a question beyond the scope of this paper. We're not going to get into that. A well-known British anthropologist commented on this passage in an earlier draft as follows, that many readers will not accept it as obvious that being forced to dine at the Paris Ritz regularly or to be chauffeured around in limousines amount to restrictions. Okay. Just like if a commie is hearing my live stream would say that, अरे भाई उसको 10,000 रुपए दिया जा रहा है इनऑस्पिशियसनेस अपने आप में लेने को, ये तो बढ़िया बात है, ये restriction कैसे हुआ? Won't they need a little more persuading that privileging someone can be a way of controlling them? These remarks were made barely 6 months after the death of Princess Diana, a death in which the Paris Ritz and a chauffeur-driven limousine figured prominently. I fail to see what more persuasive evidence could be brought forward to substantiate my claim about restrictions on royal figures. क्योंकि Princess Diana का तो मौत ही हो गया वैसे, तो वो restriction नहीं था तो क्या था? Of course, in return for some significant say in society. ऐसा ही है. See, this is why Nietzsche says, I'm going to discuss that in some other live stream more deeply, that truth can never be beautiful. A good man is, a nice man is not a good man. A good man is always ugly. And he's saying that if someone says that truth is beautiful, truth is good, and truth is also he says that truth is good, truth is important or something. That the last point is that, and truth is also beautiful. Then Nietzsche is saying, if a philosopher does say that, he needs to be thrashed because truth is always ugly, and hence we need art and things like religion. Like Anjan Datta said from a comic perspective in one of my all-time favorite Bengali movies, Madly Bangali, that religion is art. Frescoes, great music, beautiful architecture, cathedrals, etc. But why that art? As the sugar coating for ugly truths. The ugly truth is we need stable societies, kings, etc. Okay. So that's a long discussion. But the truth here is that there will be needed a king or queen or Princess Diana. Her life will be pretty tough and restrictive, but in return for that, she will have much more say in the society than you and I have. But you and I can, if we want, at least take a holiday from our job tomorrow, call in sick, or say that someone in my family passed away, I'm not coming to office tomorrow, etc. I fail to see what more persuasive evidence could be brought forward to substantiate my claim about restrictions on royal figures. And that is why truth is always ugly. For a recent illustration, see the collection of essays in Fuller. Recent defenses of Dumont may be found in Fuller, and a rather disingenuous article by Parry, who distorts certain criticisms of Dumont by taking them out of context and curiously portrays any attack on the Frenchman by other Frenchmen as attempted parricide. As seen above, when considering the fascinating case of the Mahabrahmans, Parry is not averse to contradicting Dumont himself, though with the objective of saving Dumontian theory. There is some argument about the difference between impurity and inauspiciousness. There are, on occasion, reasons to differentiate between the two, but they are not relevant here. Impurity and inauspiciousness might not be the same in every context. Yeah, okay. But that's not relevant in this paper's topic, okay? That's an interesting thing to point out. Yeah, that it's good that he pointed this out. What would be a great translation for impurity in Sanskrit? I don't know. The idea that there are great kings, little kings and lesser kings still is indicated by the title still held by the king of Nepal, which is literally 5 times glorious great king of kings. King of kings क्यों है? क्योंकि कोई और भी king है, उनका भी तुम king हो, इसलिए king of kings, इसलिए छत्रपति. No, छत्रपति doesn't mean that. I am mixing it up with some other statement. What does छत्रपति mean? छत्रपति means king of kings, right? Isn't it? So yeah, तो इसका मतलब है कोई और भी राजा है, तुम अकेले राजा नहीं हो, मगर तुम इन सब के राजा हो. Okay, now let me check some comments. Anand Sridhar is saying most Hindu texts were safe and existed in South India. The original Arthashastra was where? Yeah, in Chennai. The ugly truth is equality is a myth. We deluded ourselves with this myth to not go insane with internal disharmony. Lord Christianity was literally a Roman cult that was elevated to the level of a religious dogma for political power. Yes, but not the frescoes coming out of Christianity. Jesus is fiction, source implied, fiction, yeah. Is Christianity it's just as bad? Your soul is permanently polluted by sin from birth until you accept their dogma and propagate it. If you let the snake in your soul is tainted by original sin. And yeah, and every day you might end up doing something that again pollutes you. Which is why he did not really bring up Abrahamic faiths. He discussed, did you see, repeatedly he discussed only pre-Abrahamic faiths. क्योंकि वहाँ पे purity का deliverance or the journey of purity, inauspiciousness from one person to another is a different discussion. It's a different dialogue. Islamic purity and pollution is permanent. They only temporarily need to cleanse that impurity during prayer or ibadat. Right. Non-Muslims are permanently filthy or najaiz. Yeah. I wondered how the system between the Raja and Brahman cleansing the sins of ruling evolved under Nawab, Sultans and Mughals. Yeah, that would be... See, there are so many interesting things to research. भोसरी का रिसर्च करते जा रहा है इतने सालों से, तो क्या होगा. कितने सारे इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक्स आजकल लगता है मेरे को ही सर्च करके, अरे भाई इस पर कोई रिसर्च है ही नहीं. कि एक एग्जांपल तो हमेशा आता है कि भाई सेल्यूकस निकेटर और चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य किस भाषा में बात कर रहा था, किसने किसका भाषा पहले सीखा, कैसे सीखा, किसके वजह से सीख पाया. ये सब में रिसर्च चाहिए हमको. इंग्लिश के बिना बिजनेस नहीं होगा. ये जो चुदिया व्यू है, इट्स ऑफ कोर्स ट्रू फॉर नाउ, बट इट डजंट हैव टू बी ट्रू फॉर एवर एंड एवर. Okay then guys, thanks a lot for joining the live stream. It was very fruitful, juicy discussion today, and I forgot to thank the guy who donated that money, man. Fuck. Thank you guys, whoever donated that money. Exactly. Eta and Hinin of Japan also cleaned ritually. Oh, Espal was awake at this point. So yeah. And Espal, as you can see, the person linguist was very fascinated to find out that even South Korea has caste system. Japan has caste system. Yin and Yang is there in South Korea, and which we find out just from last day's Shakti and Shakta stream that yin and yang is in fact there almost word for word, almost verbatim in Taoism itself. Okay, which is why casteism might also. I mean, so everything here was also in some ways there as well, but which is of course Espal himself's research. Okay then, thanks for joining the live stream, guys. Good night.